there's two rules on obstructions. There's the 19, how to pass an obstruction, and then there's rule 20, to tack at an obstruction. So the 19 of passing the obstruction is the more general rule of how you're not allowed to scrape somebody else off on an island or something. And then there's a very specific rule about if you wish to tack to clear an obstruction. So we'll make those two distinctions, and then we'll look at the really complex rule 18. Some of you will leave before the end of this presentation. Please try and stay. Rule 18 is a doozy, but we'll get into it. So let's get started. Firstly, we've got the definition of an obstruction, and this is one of the things that's changed. So most of it's the same. What I've done is I use a slightly different colour of the font. You'll see in a sec if anything's changed. An object boat cannot pass without changing her course substantially. Don't really know what substantially means. It's not defined. I guess it means the common meaning. If you've got to go hard over or change course in a meaningful way that might cause other boats to avoid you, that's substantial. So it's an object you have to change course for.
So a log in the water?
Yes, that would be an obstruction. Yeah, I think so. If
even though no one else can probably see it over here.
A hat floating in the water, maybe not. But a log, yes. Something designated in the sailing instructions. Quite often our sailing instructions will designate an obstruction. Can anyone think of anything in our South Heaps? Well, that would be, it's a harbour navigational mark, so that's an obstruction. Moorings, you're not allowed to sail within the moorings, that's an obstruction. We make a special case of the waters between the Bombora and Dobroyd. That would be an obstruction. We're not allowed to sail in there. Sorry?
Ferries and cruise ships?
Yeah, ferries and cruise ships, they're obstructions. So anything that we actually call out in the sailing instructions can be an obstruction.
About finish line for this twilight's the western side of
the western side is rocks, so yes.
so the eastern side.
The eastern side, no, it's not really. I don't think we call it as an obstruction. It's just the ferry. You have to finish on to the west of it, but I don't think that's an obstruction. You're allowed to sail over here, you just can't finish over here. So, and this is the new one. Is that a different font? It's not a different font. Oh well, it's the last bit's new. A racing. Oh no, that's not new yet. Sorry. A racing boat is not an obstruction to keep to other boats unless they are required to keep clear of her. So again, the double negatives that they love to do this language. A boat that you must keep clear of is an obstruction. So if you're on port, a boat on starboard is an obstruction to you.
If you've got the Manly Ferry, you're going to be within the side of the front of that ferry.
That is an obstruction. Yes. So it's not just the ferry is the obstruction. The exclusion zone that we set around that ferry is the obstruction. Yes, exactly. The water between a pilot boat and a cruise ship is an obstruction because you're not allowed to pass between them. So. Okay, room to pass an obstruction. This rule is all in that sort of faint blue text. It has been completely rewritten, although the substance of it hasn't changed very much. There's one bit at the very bottom which changes. The rest of it's just been rewritten for clarity. Although again, it's not really that clear the way they wrote it. But so, let's go through it. Rule 19. Okay, all these rules here, 18, 19, 20, they break down the same way. They'll have a point 1 rule. So 19.1 basically tells you when the rule applies. And then your 19.2 rule will tell you what it means when the rule applies. So you'll see the same pattern, 18.1, 18.2. And so the first thing you have to do is, does the rule apply? And so we're looking at rule 19.1 to say, does rule 19 in its totality apply? So rule 19 applies between two boats, two's new, and an obstruction, except, again, the negatives. So it applies unless the obstruction is a mark and the boats are required to leave it on the same side. So if it wasn't an island, it was a mark, that's not an obstruction. When rule 18 applies between the boats and the obstruction is another boat overlapped with each of them. the new one. We used to have the situation up until December 30th that we had these 3 boats coming down here to this mark that they're overlapped, going around a mark. There's a zone there. Let's say they're inside the zone. Orange has mark room, is due mark room from blue. Orange and blue is due mark room from red. So red has to give mark room to the boats inside it under Rule 18, which we'll get to. But under the previous versions of the rules, we also had the fact that orange is windward boat and blue is windward boat and red is windward boat. So that because you have to keep clear of red, orange has to keep clear of red. So red is an obstruction to orange, or red was an obstruction to orange. It gets complicated here. Stay with me. So we had a duality that if red was squeezing up to that mark, not giving very much space, blue was obliged to give orange room because under the mark room rule. But orange was obliged to give blue room between her and red because red was an obstruction. And we will see later on in 19.2 that when you're passing obstruction you must give an overlap boat room. So if red was squeezing them up, orange was in dilemma. Should I hit the mark or should I hit blue? And blue was in dilemma. Should I hit red or should I hit orange? And as that concertina came together, it was very difficult to tell whether it was mark room that was being transgressed or whether it was an obstruction that was being transgressed, which had a big difference because one of them can be exonerated and the other one can't. And so it was a bit of a confusing thing. And strangely enough, in the 4 years that these rules applied, no one realised until the 4th year. The first 3 years it wasn't a problem, and then they had a couple of cases come up, and so they changed the rule. Basically, if you're in this situation and Rule 18 applies, then the other boats in that little boat sandwich there cannot be deemed to be an obstruction to you. So, in this particular circumstance, even though here we are, blue can't suck. I've got myself confused again here. It used to be that because red had to give blue and orange mark room. I've got myself very confused here. Sorry.
Isn't it pretty clear that red has got to give space to...
Oh yes, red has to give, by mark room rules, red had to give space, I've got it, red had to give space to blue and orange, blue had to give space to orange.
Yeah.
But because it was previously that orange had to give blue space to pass red because red was an obstruction to it. That doesn't apply anymore, it's just Rule 18. So in this situation, we don't have to worry about the obstruction rule. So there's a new way of switching it off. So if Rule 18 applies, it's a mark, and they're overlapped, we can switch it off, and we can't just say that there's multiple votes, oh, he's an obstruction team. So, it's a bit of a brain splitter. However, a continuing obstruction, Rule 19 always applies and 18 does not. So if our mark is an island, which we sometimes do, then it's a continuing obstruction, and Rule 19 does apply. So that changes it, and all of a sudden boats can be obstructions again. So they've turned it off and then they've turned it back on again. And the reason is that the consequences of hitting a mark is not very high, but the consequences of hitting an island is. So if the continuing obstruction exists, they don't want you to have to take the option of hitting the continuing obstruction, but they don't care if you hit a mark. So that's why they turn that one on there. Okay. So once we've analysed 19.1 to say whether Rule 19 applies, we have to look at Rule 19.2 to say what does that mean. And Rule 19 is all about passing an obstruction. And so we have to put, and again, the way these rules work is they're putting extra limitations on a right-of-way boat. And so in this case, a right-of-way boat has to give extra room to allow boats to pass obstructions. in this circumstance. Giving room at an obstruction. A right-of-way boat may choose to pass an obstruction on either side. So blue here is the right-of-way boat because orange is windward and must be clear, same thing. Blue has a choice. He can go either side of that island. He can't really tack, but let's say he's able to luff up there. We don't know where the wind's coming from here. But he has the ability as the right-of-way boat to choose which side he goes. If he goes to the port side, no problem, he just calls orange up, 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 up. Normal rules apply, off they sail, everyone's happy. If he chooses to go the right-hand side, bear away and go in the island, then he's got some extra limitations. When boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat room. So these boats are overlapped. Blue has to give orange room to get around that obstruction. He can't try and scrape them off. So he's got to bear away sufficiently that the overlapped boat can pass that island. The expression I use is you can't scrape somebody off on an obstruction. Be it another boat, if you duck their stern because they're starboard, you allow enough space for an overlapped boat to also duck their stern. So you've got to allow enough space of obstruction for another boat to get through there, or an overlapped boat to get through there. Unless you're unable to do so from the time the overlap began. Well, he can do it there, but if red suddenly turned up there, maybe orange can't suddenly bear away because blue's there. And maybe if he could, if it was like that, he probably could. So if you've got a whole bunch of boats going around an obstruction and they're all, becalmed, red can't come steaming in and stick his nose in and say, got an overlap, because at the time the overlap began, it was unable to do so. Then you can't. These rules don't make miracles. Just because you think you've got an overlap, you want rules, doesn't mean you can move the whole fleet sideways. So, rule C sort of hammers that home a little bit more. If it's a continuing obstruction, like an island, room must exist from the time the overlap is created. So if a boat had already set its course, and you come in and create the overlap, and there is no room there is no gap, then you can't put your nose into the gap. But if so typically if you're becalmed next to an island, and you're put pretty close to it, if another boat sails into that same becalmed area, and then starts shouting at you to give them room, they shouldn't have gone on there in the first place. So
This is classic South East.
exactly. So things like that.
So just to expand on that, you might have it on another slide coming, in a narrow channel or between two islands, when does the onus leave you? You've given them room, but you also have to protect yourself from an obstruction to the...
Oh, okay. So if you had a channel that was, 10 boats wide and you had 20 boats abreast going to it, then you got obstruction to the side. It's a difficult one because technically you have to roll back to when the overlap was established. Was it possible? Like when the boats lined up 20 abreast, who was the last one to join that thing? Well, if the room didn't exist when they joined that queue, they shouldn't have done it.
Take the Hobart Star.
Yeah, well, exactly. So room must exist from the time the overlap is created. So if someone lines up those 20 boats and there's only a 10 boat gap coming up, then it would be the last 10 boats to join it would have broken the rules. How you get them through is lots of shouting and protesting and stuff.
But if it doesn't, what happens?
Then someone runs aground.
No.
See Southport start 6 months ago. Which was exactly that. The fleet ran 2 boats aground. They had nowhere to go other than the rocks.
Slow the boat down.
Yeah, well, he's trying to slow that down. So these rules don't mean that we don't end up ourselves in blind alleys with nowhere to go. That situation can always come about. In the start of the Southport race, if it was 20 boats pushing 2 boats onto South Head, there would be an argument to say that those 20 boats should be disqualified because they should have all gone up and given room. But you have to get the aerial view and say when that overlap was established, was there room at that hard one to call when there's lots of boats, yeah. Okay. Oh yes, and so this rule applies if it's not an island, if it's, boats coming here on starboard. So it's the same thing. If you're ducking boats, if you're avoiding boats on starboard, you have to give room on the inside for any overlap boats. And if it's a ferry, it's the same thing.
Where's the bottom?
Sorry? Yeah, yes.
Must be,
It must be there.
It's on the other side of the ferry.
Okay. So room 19 is passing an obstruction. Basically, if you're passing an obstruction and someone's overlapped, you have to give them room. Rule 20 is a significantly different rule. And this is when you hail. Quite often people say hail for water. Technically, you meant to hail for room to tack. And this is where you actually have to make a tack to avoid the collision. Here we have blue and orange heading towards a continuing obstruction. And I should fill in that the wind's coming from the top of the screen, and we have to look at blue. Can't really tack without having orange come up and hit it potentially, or doing some avoiding action. So blue's not normally able to tack in that situation. We've seen that tacking on the starboard, she has to give orange. She'd break rule 15 if she just tacked straight away. But she can hail for room to tack. And again, we look at the two parts of the rule. 20.1 says when can you hail, and 20.2 will tell you what happens when you do. So when can you hail? Hail. A boat may hail for room to tack and avoid a boat on the same tack. So the other boat's got to be on the same tack. However, she shall not hail, the negative again, they always love flipping around, unless a substantial course change is required. Well, that's the definition of obstruction. If there's no substantial course change, then it's not an obstruction. So it's saying the same thing twice. They are sailing close, hauled, or above. So if you're on the kite going downwind, you can't, call for room to tack. If you're on a ridge, you can't call for room to tack. You actually have to be on the wind, going upwind. And so it's a very specific circumstances. In addition, and these are all new parts here, she shall not hail if the obstruction is a mark or a boat that is fetching it, is a mark and a boat that is fetching it would be required to change course as a result of the hail. So I'll go to, I'll put that a second here. That's the situation there, that if it was a mark, orange is fetching that mark. She can sail straight to it. So blue can't say room to tack in that situation because it's a mark and orange is getting it, and orange would have to change course, which could be nasty if the mark was that. Again, the rules are based on you normally can hit a mark. In that situation, blue should probably just break the rule and hail, because we'll see that in 20.2, if blue hails, orange has to out. And so therefore she can at least get away and not hit the big red thing. Better off would be if there was a boat coming in there, and then the boat on starboard is your obstruction. And blue can now hail for room to avoid the green boat, because she's an obstruction, and that passes the rules of 20.1. So just a little bit on that, on the terminology of what is a hail. It is in the blue book under radio controlled sailing that a hail consists of words spoken loudly enough that a boat to which the hail is directed can reasonably expect it to hear it. And it was proposed that they were going to add that to our rules, this thing, but they knocked that proposal out. And in the terminology section again, which has been greatly expanded, they have words and terms are used in the sense ordinarily understood in nautical or general use. So anything that's not a definition, things like hail, you're just going to use what does it mean in normal use. It means shouting something at somebody. So in our usage it means and it's got to be able to be heard. So you're basically going to say room to tack is the best way to do this. A lot of people just shout water, but quite often people shout water for rule 19. You're being run aground on an island and they'll shout water or give me room or something to that effect. So if you want room to use the word tack in your hail, just so the other person could say in a protest room, well, I didn't know he wanted to tack. I thought he just was giving him room to pass the obstruction, and I was giving him heaps of room. So if you want to tack, say the word tack. Room to tack is a good hail to make. So once you've hailed, what then happens? 20.2 is the rule that tells us what happens. After you've hailed, you can't immediately start tacking. You have to give the hailed boat time to respond. Because they might not be able to respond immediately because they might have a boat on the outside of them that they have to hail, who might have a boat on the outside of them that they have to hail. So if you've got the 20 boats in a row and you want room to tack, you have to start thinking, I'm going to have to hail a little bit earlier so that they all have time to pass the hails all along. Now the hails might get a little bit more expedient as they pass along the line there. Oh, please give me room to tack might turn into tacking pretty quickly, but it still has to be hailed and then time given for that boat to make a response.
So what about the dark round boat? If it's fetching the mark, does it have to tack?
Yes. Well, you'll see it in a second here. Now, if it's fetching the mark, then boat orange, and so we've got, at the moment we're showing an island here, but let's say it was a mark, then boat orange may have broken rule 20.1 by hailing. But there are terms that we can get that exonerated. But once she's hailed, then 20.2 happens no matter what. You'll see that comes up. A hailed boat shall respond even if the hail breaks rule 20.1. If someone says, I need room to tack, your response can't be, oh no you don't. Or, really, what do you draw? Or, you don't know exactly what they're seeing. They may be seeing the log that you can't see. They may have a 8-metre keel that you don't know about. There may be a person swimming in the water. So, if someone asks for room to tack, you're responding and you're giving them room to tack. If you don't agree, protest at the same time and take them to the room for breaking 20.1, but you must respond. And you've only got 2 responses that you can do. You can, and this applies to boats here, sorry. A hail boat shall respond by tacking as soon as possible, or, so the first response is if someone says room to tack, you've got to tack to give them room, or you can hail back. You tack, and then give them room to do their tack. So you can either tack immediately, or you can say you tack and give them room. Once that happens, the blue boat then is under an obligation that they must immediately tack. They can't hail for room to tack and then not tack. So here we can see orange is either tacked or orange has ducked to allow blue to tack. Once orange takes that action, blue must tack. In this situation, if orange has decided to go right and to duck those line of starboard tackers, blue can't think, oh, that's a good idea. The duck's a better idea. I should duck. I'm ducking. And start calling out rule 19 for room to pass an obstruction. Because they hail to tack, they're going to have to tack. If they don't tack, they break this rule. So it's the 2-part rule. There's the conditions of whether you should hail or not. Once you've hailed, the boat must respond either by tacking or saying you tack and giving them room to tack. Once they respond, the boat that hailed must tack. And so this is why I don't like the call of water, because this is a very specific set of actions of backwards and forwards obligations, which is different to just Rule 19 giving room at an obstruction. So by all means shout water, but I really prefer you, if you ever ended up going nasty, it'd be much simpler if you said room to tack, or I am tacking, I need room to tack, mention the word, I need water to tack. If you want to say, say the word tack, and things will go much easier. Okay. And once this has happened, Rule 18.2 doesn't apply. So once someone's hailed, until such time as those actions have taken place, the hail boat has responded and the hailing boat has tacked, turns off 18.2. So if there was a mark involved or anything like that, mark room, that's all switched off. So. Okay, that's obstructions. That's the simple rules. Now we get to the complex rules. Any questions on obstructions?
How much time you got to give? I mean, like, something sailing along, someone yells room to tack. There's got
Don't
more
make
variables
those
involved, people got to move around, etc., etc. How quickly do you need to tack in response?
Enough time so they don't hit what they're trying to avoid in a seaman-like way.
But you've got no idea what that is.
Exactly. So if someone's caused room to tack, you tack.
Tack as fast as you can.
And put it this way, if I'm sailing along close haul and there's a square rigger on my quarter, I'm going to call room to tack a lot earlier than if it's a sports boat on my, Melges 24 on my quarter. So you've got to, when you hail, you've got to have a bit of, it's your obligation to give them time. So if they're a boat that's going to take a long time to tack, then if you don't give them time to respond, it's your problem.
You're back.
So
Like that.
that's the thing. So again, it's really interesting to see that way that rule plays backwards and forwards of the obligations. It's the hail, then the obligation to give time, the obligation to respond, gives you back the obligation to actually do the tack. So real little conversation backwards and forwards. So. Okay. Mark room. This will take quite some time. I like doing 19 and 20 because they're actually quite simple rules. Mark room can be very complex. To get around a mark, your right-of-way rules can turn on and off. Your obligation rules can come in. And then you've got a really complex 18.1, 18.2, 18.3 rule to work through. So, however, if you stick to the way the rules work, really think very clearly about what's right-of-way, what are your limitations, and remember how the rules work. 18.1 doesn't apply. 18.2, what does it mean to apply? 18.3 is the extra action. It can be quite easy. It's easy as 1, 2, 3. 18.1, when the rule applies. 18.2, how you give your mark room. 18.3, tacking in a zone is a little extra condition. And I lied, it's not 1, 2, 3, it's 18.4 jiving as well. So that's the 4 rules about mark. But remember the way it works. So when you're talking about mark room, the first place to go to is 18.1 to work out, does mark room rule apply? And you'll spend a lot of time, 18.1 is a big rule, as you'll see in a second, to work out, does the rule apply? Once you've worked out if the rule applies, then you say, what does it mean, 18.2? And you'll spend, it's a big rule, 18.2, to work out what does it mean to apply. And then you've got 3 and 4, which can change things once actions take place while you're in the zone. So anyway, let's go through this bit by bit. When Rule 18 applies, 18.1. It's quite a verbose thing, but there's only a fair few points in here. So, Rule 18 applies between boats when they are required to leave the mark on the same side. Yes. At least one of them is in the zone. So there's a zone of 3 boat lengths around the mark, and that's the definition of what it is. So if at least
Can I ask a question? What about boats of different sizes?
it's, well, this rule should have been at least one of them is in their zone, would make it clear, because the zone is defined as if one of them is within 3 boat lengths of the mark, then one of them is in the zone. So if you've got Bacara up against Wild Oats, then Wild Oats' zone starts 300 feet from the mark, and if you look at those 2 boats, if one of them is within their zone, or the zone, then Rule 18
So
can,
it's the biggest boat?
yeah, can apply. Well, if Bacara is at 300, if Wild Oats is at 305 feet and Bacara is at 300 feet, there's no boat in the zone. Wild Oats is outside her zone, Bacara is outside her zone. But if Bacara is at 200 feet and Wild Oats is at 300 feet, one of them is in the zone for that boat. So, however,
I'm not basing it against
yes. So, however, there's always a however in things. It does not apply, so once one of them is in the zone, it can apply, but then there's a list of 4 exclusions of it doesn't apply. Between boats on an opposite tacks on a beat to windward. So if you're working close haul to windward and you're on opposite tacks, it doesn't apply. There's a slight variation between boats on opposite tacks when the proper course of the mark for one but not the both of them is to tack. I'll show you an example. Decode that language. It's very difficult language. I'll show you an example. Between a boat approaching the mark and one leaving it. Well, that's obvious. So one's gone, one's coming in. Marking doesn't apply. Or if the mark is a continuing obstruction, in which case Rule 19 applies. And that's the flip side of what we just saw. Rule 19 itself says that if it's continuing obstruction, it always applies. 18 doesn't. So let's look at some of these examples here. Here we have 2 boats. Does Rule 18 apply to these 2 boats?
No.
No. Neither of them is in the zone. Good. So there is no zone. There's no mark. They're just boats. Green must keep clear of blue because they're overlapped, same tack. Green's the windward boat. So if 18 turns off, it's like there is no mark. Okay, here we have 2 boats. Does Rule 18 apply?
Yes.
Exactly. One of them is in the zone. It's touched the zone. So that's good. 2 boats. No zone, no mark, because they're on opposite tacks and it's a beat to windward. Okay, these 2 boats. Are they opposite tacks? Yes. It's not a beat to windward. Is the course for one of them to tack, but the other one is to bear away. So orange has to tack and yellow has to bear away. So 18 doesn't apply to these guys either. So that's B. It's very subtly different to A, but it doesn't apply.
But it achieves the same result, so why the significance of B? I don't get it.
I'd have to look, for that sort of stuff, you'd have to look at the casebook. With the rules, you can always go onto Yachting Australia, or Sailing Australia, and find the casebook, which is how all the rules have been applied to individual cases. And it'd be interesting to find a case that specific names 18.1.B and see why it was using that rather than A. But basically, A is nice and simple because it's a beat to windward, and they've just extended A a little bit to when it's not a beat to windward, and one has to tack on the other one.
Wouldn't that, an example of that, they would have both been to windward, but one is overlaid out to the right too far and is now reaching in the other one.
But see, there's a new rule we'll get to in a second, which says, does that mean that boat that's overlaid is already rounded the mark or not? And that's an interesting question because the overlay a mark can be, if it's a passing mark, you might have passed the mark. So that yellow might then be on a different leg to the other one, which is C. And so there's a new rule which helps us decide whether they've just overlaid it or whether they've actually rounded it. Anyway, so here's another subtly interesting one. These 2 boats, are they on a beat to windward? Actually, they're not, because they haven't yet passed the mark. They're coming in from down here, and the wind's up here. They're on a reach. That's a reaching leg. The next leg after this mark is a beat to windward. But these boats here, and people may have overstood a little bit, these boats here are on a reaching leg. So they're not on a beat to windward, so A doesn't apply. Between boats and opposite tacks, when the proper course of the mark is one but not the other to tack, well, both of these, neither of these have to tack. He can go that way and he can go that way, but he thinks the wind's good that way, he thinks the wind's good that way. They can both justify continuing on. No one needs to tack. So B doesn't apply. Between a boat approaching a mark and one leaving it, well, it's very hard to, is purple leaving it? Difficult. I don't think C applies. That'd be a difficult one to do. If the mark is a continuing obstruction, no, this is a yellow spar mark. It's not. I don't think A, B, C, or D apply to those things. So therefore, mark rule does apply. In this case, purple has to give orange space, or we'll have to go through into detail of A, B, C, and D. And you'll see in a section why I have a good simplification for you all to apply rather than going through this on the water, because you can't run this on the water. Okay, so another two boats inside the zone. Opposite tacks. Downwind does apply. So even though you're on opposite tacks, Rule 18 can apply because you're downwind. You're not on a bit to windward. No one's tacking there, one boat's jibing. It's interesting that the mark random rule makes a difference between a tack and a jibe, so it does apply there. It's a continuing obstruction, so it doesn't apply because it's a continuing obstruction. It's not. Okay, so that's basically, you apply Rule 1 to say, 18.1 to say when the rule applies. Are we talking about it? And it's mostly going to be two boats on the same tack inside the zone is the most common case. Here's the monster. So once you've gone through 18.2, 18.1 to say that mark room applies, you've got 18.2 giving mark room. And I've summarised this. I've cut out heaps of text at the bottom. There's a 18.d is a new rule there. So if you're a rules lawyer and you can parse all this, and you're sure that somebody else that you're going to close contact with knows all these rules, then you can apply all these. If you have any doubt that you know all the rules and that the other guy knows all the rules, then I highly recommend, you just look at the first bit here. You ignore all that stuff. When boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat mark room. If someone gets inside, you give them room. If you can. If you're outside, go round the outside. RTO, round the outside. That, if all you take away from tonight's thing is, if someone's overlapped inside, you give them room. That's a good rule of thumb to go by.
But how's that different to what we already do? That's what we always
Well, what we'll now see is that all this verbiage in here is all about whether that overlap, what does it mean to be overlapped inside? When was that overlap established? Was it overlapped in enough time? Was it inside the 3 boat lengths or not? And so it avoids boats arriving late and stuff like that. So there is reasons for the B, C, D, E and F. And that is because boats can unfairly take advantage and can come steaming in and cause problems and not all the surroundings. And yes, some boats will establish an overlap late and try and demand the room when they're not due. And my advice would be give them the room at the time, and if you're sure that they didn't need it, protest and find out which of the B, C, D, E or F that they've broken and take that to the protest room. So we'll go through all these now in detail to show what all these complications are, and it's mostly about when does that overlap establish and what does it mean. So 18.2 hinges on overlap, greatly on overlap. 3 boats here. Who's overlapping who?
Orange. Overlapping green.
Yeah, so at the moment, at that instant in time, it looks like orange is overlapping green and blue is clear ahead of both the other two. However, 18.2b talks about overlap when the first of them reach the zone. So when you're talking about overlap for the detail of Rule 18, it's when the first boat reached the zone. So you have to turn back time until when the first boat reached the zone. So let's go back in time. Look, there's the first boat reaching the zone. This is when we have to start talking about overlap. Are these boats overlapped?
Yeah.
Are they?
Close.
They're close. They could be. I don't know. There's a little bit of doubt. I'm not sure whether they're overlapped. Oh, luckily there's a rule for that. 18.2e. If there is reasonable doubt that a boat obtained or broken an overlap, she did not. Weird language, huh? If there's reasonable doubt that she did something, she didn't. So we're looking at these boats here. We're saying, did orange establish an overlap on green? Did green, did blue break an overlap on green? If there's an action that is going to have to take place, we assume that it didn't. And if an action didn't take place, then the best way to work out what the status is again to roll back time to before that action didn't take place. Does that make sense? So we turn back time, we go back a little bit further, and we see what the situation was then. Oh look, it's a little bit different. Here, green has an overlap on blue, and orange is clear astern. So for the purposes of Rule 18, that's the overlap we care about. It's not the overlap that was there. The overlaps were there. For the purposes of the rule, we turn back time, and that's the overlap that we've got. So green overlaps on blue, orange is clear astern of green and blue. And so when we apply what Rule 18 means, that's the situation we look at. So we move back time until there is no doubt. Because the problem is, that 3 boat length zone is really hard to judge. So it's really difficult to say, at the instant you cross into the 3 boat zone, there was or wasn't an overlap. But if you've been sailing side by side with the boat for the last 5 minutes, you roll back time. I've been overlapped for a nautical mile. Then it's pretty clear you've got the overlap at the 3 boat zone. So if you wish to establish that you had an overlap, or you wish to establish that you broke an overlap, the time to do that is not at 3 boat lengths. It's at a significant time before those 3 boat lengths. I've been saying along for ages, there's no overlap, there's no overlap, there's no overlap. And if someone gets their nose in there just at the last moment, just as you think you're at the 3 boat lengths, well, there's doubt that they did that in time. And you can say, I don't think they did it in time, unless they can prove they did it, which is very hard to do. There's doubt, you roll it back, and the protest committee will say, oh, you were saying there was no overlap. I was looking along my arm, it was perpendicular, there was no overlap. Therefore, Decky wasn't calling overlap, there was no overlap. So you do it nice and early. And so that's the way you get around from trying to judge this exact 3 boat thing. You turn back time until everything was clear. And if there's doubt, you turn back time further. And if there's a race, something that did happen in time, it didn't. It's simple. If there's a valid question, did it happen in time? It didn't. By Rule C. Okay. Oh no, it's been renumbered. And so 18.2c, once we've established this overlap requires a boat to give mark room, she shall continue to do so even if that overlap is broken or a new overlap begins. So the overlaps that happen after that time don't matter, or the overlaps that are broken after that time don't matter. Rule 18 depends on the overlap when it was basically the clearest overlaps that existed just before you entered that 3 boat zone. And that concept of overlap persists until you've rounded them up. Okay, so you've worked out that Rule 18 applies, you've worked out you've got your overlap, so you do mark room. What does mark room mean? Mark room, it's defined, it's quite a big definition, and it involves 4 basic things, and these have become quite important in a second with the new rule. I'll read them out of order. If you're due mark room, it means you're allowed to sail to the mark, you're allowed to leave the mark on the required side, you can round the mark as necessary to sail your course, and then this double negative, this is almost triple negative, however, it does not include room to tack unless, which means it does include room to tack if you are overlapped inside the windward of the other boat. So, I'll go into those details later. Room to sail the mark, room to leave the mark on the required side, room to round the mark, and maybe room to tack. Not necessary, conditional room to tack. So let's see how that works. A couple of examples. 2 boats here going for a port rounding, I think. Yep, port rounding. Green is the kick clear boat. She's windward. The same tack, 18.1, so the rule applies. Blue has inside overlap on green. Do we agree with that? Green's touched the zone. There's definitely an overlap there. Blue is due mark room by 18.2. main on, get the crew hiking, you know, hopefully there's wind getting around green, and squeeze herself up there, squeezing herself up to get to that mark. So she's room to sail the mark. Which she was, and she's allowed to put screen up anyway, even the mark wasn't there. She's right on the boat. So in this thing, it doesn't change very much. She's entitled to luff there, because that's, you know, what's required to get around the mark. She could have luffed green anyway. By rule 11. She's entitled to round the mark, so she needs room to get a bum steering around down here and bear away. And off she goes. So that's nice port rounding, it's a fairly simple thing. Blue didn't really need much more help from this rule than what she would have got by being the leeward boat anyway. Okay, but it can be a little bit different on a starboard rounding. Here these two boats are coming in also on the starboard lay line. We're going around the mark the other way this time. Green is the keep clear boat. Same tack, so 18 does apply. Green has the inside overlap in blue. Green is due mark green by then up 2. Everyone's agree with that? Just hit the zone. So now we're coming in here. Green can sail the mark. Room to round the mark, and now she's entitled to room to tack at the mark. Because of that verbiage down there, she's the inside overlap boat to windward. So this is the condition when she is allowed to tack, which means that she's allowed to swing a bum around and get around that mark, and blue has to give her enough room to swing a bum out and get around that mark. And round they go. Everybody's happy. Nice, simple rounding. Now it's a little bit more complicated. Here we have a similar sort of boat, but green didn't get in there in time. Green didn't establish her overlap. Blue got to the zone clearly ahead. Green's behind. Green's not entitled to mark room. Blue is entitled to mark room. She was at the zone first, so she's entitled to mark room, and she's allowed to sail the mark. So up she goes, luffing up a little bit there to get to the mark. But you know, she didn't manage to squeeze green out early enough, so green's still in there. There's now a bit of an overlap. Overlap doesn't matter. Blue's still entitled to mark room. Oh! The blue's trying to tack to go around the mark. Blue's not entitled to room to tack. Because definition, unless she is overlapped inside into windward, she's not allowed. That's not mark room. Mark room doesn't give you room to tack by definition. Also, just to be really clear, this new rule 18.2d, mark room ceases to apply when the boat entitled to mark room passes head to wind or leaves the zone. So she's tacked, she's passed head to wind. So this rule, this infringement here, this collision, is something we very frequently get in this club. Where a boat that hasn't quite laid a mark, you know, blue was down a little bit, thinks that she can come and tack, and in green's thinking adventurous, oh look, she's left the door open. I'm going faster, I can get in there. And in that case, green actually can get in there because blue's not allowed to tack. Blue, because once 18.2 turns off, there's no mark room. Blue must keep clear while tacking. Rule 13. Even if she managed to get through a tack, she's now on port. She's got to keep clear. But this is where it gets complicated. If blue was a little bit further ahead and there was still that collision, green is obliged by racing rule 16 to give room when she's changing course. So if blue's squeezing across, green can't luff up into her rounding. She's changing course and cause a collision. So see that there? If blue was across, green would have to have stayed down there rather than luffed up. So this is a really subtle difference we get, and I've sat on probably 4 or 5 protests for this in the last 2 years, of boats colliding as they, I think that's obvious. Yeah, definitely obvious. And so the difficulty we get is spot the difference. There's, on the left, blue's tacked when she wasn't allowed to, and being T-bowed by green. On the right, blue tacked and got across green. Green changed course someone's broken a rule and it's really difficult to tell the difference between those two rules.
True.
Even worse is if green crash tacked because they saw the collision coming and green's thrown the helm over. We've had those two situations as a collision, and the way you can tell the difference between those two situations is really going to be whereabouts on those two boats that they hit. They hit side by side, it bow to stern. It's a difficult one. But if I was to pick one of those boats to be, I'd much rather be green than blue. It was very clear blue didn't have room to tack. And blue would have had to establish that she could get across. It's a lot harder to show that green was changing course rather than crash checking to avoid a collision. So just remember, if you open the door at a mark and a boat gets inside, they might not be told to mark room, but it doesn't mean that you can tack in front of them. So just because they've got their nose in where they don't belong, doesn't mean you can tack in front of them. Okay. New rule. This is an entirely new rule. Nothing like this existed before or the last sentence. It became apparent that it was very difficult to know when mark room ended. And so they came up with this wonderfully obtuse rule to say when does mark room cease to apply. It ceases to apply if people tack or leave the zone, and there's other rules for that. But when do they round the mark? When does it cease to apply? So they say rules 18.2b and c cease to apply when the boat entitled to mark room has been given that mark room. It's kind of self-evident. You're allowed mark room until you've been given mark room. What the hell does that mean? Well, it means precisely these four things. Once you have been given room to sail to the mark, you've been given room to leave the mark on the required side, you've been given room to round the mark as necessary to sail the course, and conditional inside overlap, blah, 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 room to tack if you needed to tack. Once those four things have been done, then mark room switches off. But until those four things are done, mark room stays on. And so this is an important new rule, aspect to the rule. This is the one that changes what we do in the water the most. Here we have two boats coming into the zone. We're doing a port rounding. Orange is clear ahead of blue as she hits the zone. Orange is therefore due mark room. She's also the right-of-way boat. Off she sails to the mark. She sails the mark. She's left the mark to the right side, the correct side. She's rounding the mark. At this point here, has orange rounded the mark as necessary to sail the course?
It depends on where the next mark is.
It depends, exactly. Give the man a prize where the next mark is. If that's the next mark, yeah, she's certainly rounded sufficiently to sail the course. If she wants to jibe because she thinks the wind's better over the other side, on the left-hand side of the course, she can't jibe. By the normal rules, she can't jibe in front of blue there. And mark room doesn't allow her to do so. But if the mark's over there, with ley lines like that, or maybe a peninsula of rock or something that she's got to get up and over, then to sail the course, orange has to jibe. So at this point in time, mark room has not turned off. So therefore, at this point in time, blue is still obliged to give orange mark room, and orange can jibe and take blue with her. Or blue has to somehow teleport herself out of there and that's probably the biggest change that we're going to get, especially for a club like ours, where our courses aren't always windward fluids, and sometimes the angles that are coming out can be pretty reachy, and you definitely have to jibe. So that one there is an interesting rule, and until these rules get tested in the protest rooms and appeal things, it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. So it'll be a brave orange that forces that jibe the first time. But orange does have that right to force that jibe, and I would strongly suggest to orange that she probably started explaining the rule to blue probably a little bit before then.
So, sailing to an offset mark to keep downwind boats away from upwind boats. That offset mark puts you to one side of the course. Your proper course on windward leeward is now the jibe set is a better option for sailing. It's a proper course to the bottom mark. Does that entitle you to rights, or is the
So if it was a port rounding, well, if it, in this case it was a port rounding, it was an offset mark, it would be over here.
yeah?
So,
And now your bottom mark is to the right of the bottom of the stream, right?
down here.
Not that.
Or if it's windward leeward, it would be down here.
Yeah.
But the question is,
So is your proper course now a jibe set to that bottom mark, or are you obliged to just bear away?
I would say that, basically the way it's going to be hard to tell, the reading I've done of people interpreting it, they're sort of talking about ley lines. So if that's the downwind mark, and you can work out your ley lines there. If you're outside that, then you have to jibe to get that in. Then the jibe's going to be part of that course. If you're inside, then any jibe you do is going to be tactical, because while you're sailing this way, you're still sailing to the mark. Out here, sailing this way, you're sailing away from that.
That makes sense.
So,
I mean, if you look at that one you've got there, basically your wind would be coming roughly from where the figure 1 is. So therefore, as you're coming down, you are going to jibe, are either going to come down on the left hand or the right hand side to get to that mark.
yeah.
You're not just going to run straight to the mark.
Oh, on this one,
No, the other one.
that one there.
Yeah, I mean, it's that when you've been working up from that mark to that mark, so you're working right into the wind, so your wind is coming from basically
Or you might have come in from over here or something this bit.
or wherever, but you're tacking up, and I'm saying the true wind is up where the figure 1 is basically. Further round, you're setting a course.
Oh well, this indicates here that the wind's coming from north, because that's the downwind ley lines to the mark. So that suggests the wind's coming in this way.
If it's a windward leeward.
Yeah. Oh, but this is a windward leeward.
Right.
So this rule is not going to really apply in a windward leeward. In a windward leeward, it's this situation, and the ley lines here. When you come around, then it doesn't matter which way you're going. You are sailing towards the mark. You're sailing the course. Which way you want to go is a tactical decision, and this mark room rule doesn't give you the ability to jibe for a tactical decision. So it's only if it's not a windward leeward course. Can you think that a jibe might be included in your mark room obligations? So, but for a lot of racing that would be unlikely. For our racing, we do occasionally have some pretty skewed courses, especially summer series and things like that. So, and twilights as well, maybe. So that's probably the biggest change we've got here.
Greg, sorry, what you've written up there says that the boat is entitled to mark room, has been given that mark room, or if she passes head to wind and then loses that title.
Yes.
So as soon as you pass head to wind, doesn't that mean it's immaterial where your next mark is?
Yeah.
You pass
Oh,
head
yeah.
to
So
wind,
that's
you're
why
no longer have that.
that's why the example here is a jibe. Neither boat passed head wind; they just bore away and jibe. So yes, on an upwind mark, then the moment you tack, your mark room might involve room to tack, so you can complete your tack. But the moment you pass head to wind, it's turning off. So yeah, if this is the other way around, if they were coming down here and going right there, you could never say a tack was allowed in mark room, because a tack is explicitly here, passes head to wind. Only jibes. Okay. How are we going to time? We'll get out of here before 10, we will. Again, if it's getting, we've now got the meat of the stuff. So if you've got to go, guys, I'm not going to be insulted if you walk out quietly. It's fine. So we can bang through the rest pretty quickly. So these ones have changed only because it used to be E, now it's F. If someone tries to establish an overlap, and from the time they got the overlap, it's not possible to do, then it's not possible. The rule's not a teleporting rule. If you can't sail in there and go, give me a mark room if there isn't any. So, tacking in the zone. Okay, this one's changed. It's made simpler. This rule used to apply to both starboard roundings and port roundings. So the first sentence is new. If a boat in the zone of a mark to be left to port passes head to wind, blah, 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 or tacks in the zone, she shall not cause a boat to sail above close haul. So this, I've got a diagram for the people doing this coming up. This used to go both ways, but here we are here. This is basically a lee bow tack, which we saw earlier in our examples, is a perfectly legal thing to do if there's no mark there. That, you know, blue can come in and tack on green's lee bow, and the fact that green has to luff a little bit because, you know, blue completed her tack just ahead of her and green had to luff, well, that's kind of tough luck on green in normal circumstances. But 18.3 says that if by doing that tack, green then has to, the blue's gone slow, green's caught up and had to luff up to avoid a collision. Blue has broken 18.3. So the whole idea of 18.3 is to avoid the great hero on port charging in and doing a lee bow tack just inside the mark there. You know, if you're blue, you know, you're in a world of pain. You know, it's very hard for you to tack in there without making green luff up a little bit. And if green has to do anything luff up a little bit, you've broken 18.3. Now that used to apply on starboard roundings as well, which made starboard roundings even tougher. Because here, I mean, blue's got a world of pain if this 18 was off anyway, because it's a port starboard. It also, 18.3, she shall give mark room if the boat becomes overlapped inside her. So if blue somehow got across green and then tacked, and green's in, you know, blue's going slowly because she tapped, green catches up, then blue has to give mark room to green. So that's a case where a late established overlap has to be respected. If green's steaming in there at high speed, blue comes in on port, tacks, and says, oh, you've just established the overlap, you know, inside the zone, it doesn't count. That's not the case. Because blue tacked, she allows boats to come in inside her, and she has to give them mark room. So a lately established overlap in that situation has to be respected. That used to apply on a starboard rounding. So here we have a starboard rounding where blue's done a late hero tack, and green's had to luff up. And that used to be, up until 1st of January, that blue had broken a rule because green luffed up, which is a bit unfair because blue was a starboard boat, and if there wasn't a mark there, blue was in front at that point. You know, blue was going to be able to force green to tack away. Why should green have an advantage there? So they've turned that rule off for starboard roundings. So if you're coming in on starboard, you know, you can force green to luff up a little bit. But you can't take too much. So in that case, there's no mark. 18 doesn't apply because you're on opposite tacks. You've still got to do 10, 16 and 13. So opposite tacks applies, changing course where you luff up into your tack, while you're tacking you'll get clear. But if you can do a normal tack as if there wasn't a mark, then you're fine. You can force green to luff up a little bit. But you still got to be a little bit careful. If blue was a little bit more advanced here, same situation, going with starboard rounding, and there is, you know, it's opposite tacks, so that it's like there is no mark. And blue gets across green nice and easily, so it's fine. But let's say blue's a little bit lazy, she tacks a little bit late, green comes up inside her. So it's fine, there was no mark, there's no rule 18, because, you know, they were on opposite tacks. So here we are in this situation where blue's the windward boat. She's now required to keep clear of green, you know, if there was no mark. So she's the windward boat. But let's go back to 18.1. It's like, applies, at least one of them is in the zone. Yeah, they're both in the zone. It doesn't apply if they're on opposite tacks. No, they're the same tack. Between opposite tacks, the proper course, they're both bearing away. Approaching leading, no, they're both approaching. If the mark is continuing obstruction, no, okay. Look, 18.1 suddenly applies again. So there, oh, the marks reappeared. Because now, 18.1, you know, it has a whole bunch of conditions about the zone and stuff like that, but these two boats managed to get themselves into a position where it suddenly applied again. So therefore, our golden simple rule of thumb applies. 18.2a. Round the outside. When boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat mark room. Nice and simple. Green's got herself inside blue, because blue did a really sloppy tack at the mark. Green gets itself an overlap there, then she's going to be given mark room. If blue tries to shut the door, put it there. Which can lead to some silly tactics. So we've all seen this. Manly mark is a one. Boats coming along the starboard lay line, other boats on the port lay line. Blue realises, I could get some troubles here with green if she gets an inside overlap or I'm not so good. I really want green to go away. How can I get green to go away? I know, I'll slow down just a little bit, maybe not sail so high, and I'll shout starboard at green. I'll go hunt green. I'll go force green into attack. Oh good, green's tapped now. Don't have to worry about her. I can go do my, green luffs you then, and you go both get around the mark that way. So wasn't that wonderful? Blue's beaten green around the mark, as she probably should have, because she was the starboard boat there first. But that was a horrible rounding for both boats. And we have to assume there's another, 10, 20 boats out there that they're racing against the fleet. That was a silly way from both of them to round that mark, because they both lost out to the fleet. So what's a much better way for it to happen if you're coming into this situation, and our fleet should do it? Well, green should realise that blue's on starboard, she's getting there first. If green looks like she's going to try any silly business, like running in there and establishing an inside overlap, then blue's going to hump them. So green should be very clear that she's going to let blue go through. She can luff up a little bit, slow up a little bit. Blue will get through nice and orderly, green will follow her around. Both boats go around nice and orderly, and they've done well against the fleet. So sometimes you've got to use your nous rather than the rules. So green can give up a little bit rather than trying to get in there. Because if green pushes the rules, blue will push the rules and force green into attack. So, cooperative roundings. What have we got here? Again, same sort of thing applies if you're reaching onto a starboard mark. Here we have blue and green reaching in to the mark. Quite often you'll see in our fleets, green is going right at the mark, and it takes a while to come up onto the wind. So she's going in tight and out wide. And this is going to open the door for blue, who might try and do it in wide, out tight. So blue goes in wide, comes up high, and establishes a highlight lane on that mark. Again, this is quite often obvious. So what happens here? Green was owed mark room, but at this point in time, green has been given her mark room. Green has sailed to the mark. Green has passed the mark on the correct side. Green has rounded the mark as required to sail her course. She's sailing upwind there, and there was no tack necessary. Mark room is turned off. There is no mark. Can green tack? No, green can't tack there. Bang! Green's obliged by racing rule sailing 13 when she's tacking. Go keep clear. She can't even luff quickly because that would be a change of course. So in that situation back there, which is a very frequent situation of a boat that's gone in wide and left the door open, if a boat gets inside of you, you've got to give them the rights they're due. So this goes back to what I keep saying that boats that get inside of you, sometimes they're not due that room, but sometimes they are due the rights if they get their nose in there. So, almost done here. Downwind. Graham's going to like this one. This rule, I know, winds Graham up immensely. But there is now help for this rule. This is the story of Poor Little Red. And this is our second last slide, I think. Poor Little Red is trying to get around this mark, and they've stupidly hasn't established an inside overlap. So downwind roundings, it's all about who's got the inside overlap. So we're going to look at the overlaps here. We've got orange and blue got overlap on red. It's difficult to say whether yellow's got a overlap on red. And we'll just leave that doubt there. We can resolve it by going backwards in time if we had, but we'll leave that uncertainty. Green doesn't have an overlap on red, but green's coming in at high speed. So things are about to change. Oh, we're coming here. Here's red, obliged to give mark room to orange and blue because they have an inside overlap. They're opposite tacks, doesn't matter because they're downwind. She probably has to give room to yellow because yellow was, it was possible that she established the overlap. Maybe she doesn't. But she doesn't have to give overlap to, mark room to green. So, how can red stop green getting in there? Green's just following through blue, going, red has to give blue room and give orange room. Red has to go wide. Is it going to end up like this? Blue down the bottom there. So, where we go here? The question is, how does red keep green out? Well, red can't luff green because blue's in the way. So, in order to keep green out, red has to take some pretty substantial action. Red's going to have to slow up and then start trying to luff green to say, you're not allowed in there. And then previously, green could say, well, you can't luff me, mate. I've got yellow here, and I was definitely overlapped with yellow. Yellow's an obstruction to me. So you can't luff me because I've got an obstruction here. You've got to give me room to clear my obstruction. But new rule. When 18 applies and the both set of obstructions overlap with each other, green can no longer say that yellow is an obstruction to her. So now red has a lot more power to luff that boat out of there if she can somehow slow up enough to get rid of blue. So if she does nothing, she could probably go around the bottom there. She's now last when she was third. And she could probably try and protest with green and say, if green wasn't there, I could have sailed up to where green was and been second last. She might win that protest. It's tough. Or she could start slow up, see a little zigzag there, and then luff green and make green miss the mark. Problem is that okay, yellow's not an obstruction, but yellow's got to go somewhere. And I don't know where yellow is going to go because yellow's just going to shout protest. If she somehow gets behind or crash attacks, it's a little bit better. But basically, the situation was bad for red from that moment when she's on the outside. Comes back to round the outside. If you're on the outside, give the inside boats room. So while red has some rights on green and on yellow, it's going to be really hard to enforce. If the boat gets inside you, you're basically going to have to sail around the outside. And that's the way it goes. Okay, I think, do I have one more slide? Jiving, one last slide. When you're doing a downwind mark with an inside overlap right away boat, must jive at the mark to sail her proper course. So here we have orange and blue. They're opposite tacks, but they've got an inside overlap, so 18 applies. How far can they sail on past the mark? And this says that they can't sail no further from the mark than they need to sail that course. So orange and blue can't take red out to Kingdom Come. They basically got to come in here and jive immediately at that mark. If they don't round that mark close, if they mess their drop up, for instance, and they sail another 50 yards past the mark and take red with them, then they've broken 18.4. So if you're coming in on port on an inside overlap, you have to make sure you do a nice tight rounding. Yes, you're at tight with mark room, but it's got to be a nice tight rounding. Okay, I think, our summaries. Port, windward, astern tacking boats keep clear. If you avoid contact, if you acquire rights, you give room. Change course, you give room. Don't sail above your proper course in some circumstances. Round the outside. All those mark rooms rules, I think I've hopefully shown you very quickly how they work. So if you want to sit there and analyse them, you can work out how they work. But essentially, unless you're a rules lawyer and you're sure the other boat knows, if a boat gets inside you, give them room. If if you're upset about it, protest and go work out whether they were allowed to do that. No harm if you lose a protest. Everyone will learn something. Protest is part of the sport. Questions?